Okay, here we are on Monday. This is ThinkTech Global, and we have the good fortune, I suppose, of being able to regroup with Russel Kekoa Koehler. He's in Istanbul. He's our correspondent in Istanbul. Thank you for joining us at, what is it, 11 o'clock at night in Istanbul, Russel?
It's, right now it is 12:15.
Oh my goodness, it's worse than I thought, but thank
But
you,
I'm glad to be
double
back.
thanks.
No problem.
Well, the reason I wanted to circle back with you is because there have been some very bad incidents in Turkey in the last 2 or 3 days, and I wanted to cover them with you and try to interpret them. I guess the bottom line is that there was a set of attacks, 2 timed attacks, suicide bombers apparently in Ankara, which is the capital of Turkey, in the middle of Turkey, sort of right in the middle. Which is not Istanbul, but halfway across. And 100 people, maybe more. I mean, there were estimates of 95, 100, and now estimates of 128 people were killed in these 2 attacks. And hundreds more were wounded, many of them critically wounded. And imagine Turkey is a Western country, really. Can you imagine that happening here in the United States? It would be a 9/11 kind of experience. And the question is, what happened, Russell? What is going on there? This is in a series of attacks. There were attacks only a few weeks ago, as I recall, in the south of Turkey. Now we have this major attack in the capital.
Yes, exactly. I mean, it's a very unfortunate situation, and the official numbers have been coming out according to the Turkish Medical Association, which puts the death count at now 97. And the wounded at over 500. It's an even more terrible situation when you realize that these people were killed while participating in a peace march, calling for the end of hostilities between the PKK and Turkish military in the southeast. So it's really just right now. The country's in mourning and an official 3 days of mourning. But to happen in Ankara, the capital of Turkey, I couldn't even imagine if this would happen in Washington D.C. or some other European capital.
Yeah. So let's try to analyze. I mean, is there news out on exactly who? Well, first, let's talk about the peace march. Who is marching? For peace is always good, but who are they marching for and against in terms of the political alliances in Turkey right now?
Yes, of course. This march was actually organized by many of the labor organizations of Turkey. So you have a lot of left-wing activists, as well as the pro-Kurdish HDP party activists that were participating in this event. And so you would say that these individuals are anti-government, but are business representatives and represent the unions across the country. They were calling for peace in the southeast of Turkey. And it seems as though that, according to scholars, lawmakers, even students, that the fault really they placed on the national government, not so much the individual group, which has now been suspected as ISIS, according to the Prime Minister of Turkey, Ahmet Davutoglu. So they're blaming the government for not providing the necessary security measures for a rally of over 14,000 people in the nation's capital.
So what was the notion of marching for peace? I mean, so the Kurds were marching for peace, and they want the government to stop attacking the Kurds. I mean, as simple as that, isn't it?
Unfortunately, in this country, it's
nothing is
never
simple. Yeah,
exactly. It's never simple. Right now, what we have is a conflict in the southeast of the country involving the Kurdish terrorist organization that's been officially labeled as that by the U.S. government, by the Turkish government, the PKK, and they're fighting against the Turkish military, following the attacks that occurred on July 20th. the previous ISIS suicide bombing in Turkey.
But the Kurds are against ISIS, right? And ISIS and the Kurds are fighting with each other, aren't they?
Yes, yes, exactly. And that's really where the complexity comes out. You have now Kurdish militants in Syria who are fighting against ISIS. We know now that the famous siege of Kobane, as well as the Kurds inside Turkey that help the Syrian Kurds. But the Suruç attacks, which were on July 20th, that killed over 34 people, a lot of Kurds felt that the Turkish government, in supporting jihadist elements in Syria, the rebel opposition, openly, instead of really vetting who they would support, really led to the growth of ISIS and eventually led to these now multiple suicide bombings inside Turkish territory.
And that's ISIS. I mean, has everybody agreed that it is ISIS?
Many security experts in Turkey have narrowed it down to ISIS, and the reason for that is there bears a resemblance between this attack and to the Suruç attack on July 20th, which also killed many Kurdish activists, and actually the June 5th suicide bombing, which was attacking a pro-HDP, which is the pro-Kurdish party in the Turkish parliament.
Yeah.
And so there have been statements by Prime Minister Davutoglu to say that they're open on who they are suspecting. They're looking at the PKK as a potential suspect, as well as a couple communist elements in the country. But it would be rather cynical to believe that a Kurdish militant group would attack really its own people in Turkish Kurds, as well as the party that represents their interests indirectly in the parliament.
Let me just go back for a minute and try to identify all the parties I heard you talking about, and some others. Okay, so we have the Kurds, and then we have ISIS, and they're fighting with each other.
Yes.
And the Turkish government is kind of fighting with the Kurds that are the activist Kurds in Syria. Then we have the rebels in Syria. That's not the same as the Kurds or ISIS. And then we have the Syrian government, the Assad government, and they're fighting with the rebels, but they're also being attacked by the ISIS, and I suppose also by the Kurds. Am I right so far?
Exactly, and that's why.
Okay, then we got the Russians. Then we got the Russians. Now the Russians like the Assad government, so they're attacking everyone who attacks the Assad government, or are they attacking the Kurds, the rebels, ISIS, or some or all of those?
Right now, the Russian government is attacking, they've declared as terrorist organizations, all terrorist organizations that are fighting against the legitimate regime in Syria. Of course, to them, the legitimate regime is the Bashar al-Assad regime. And this very open notion of terrorist organization is politically, it gives them the credibility to attack these very moderate militant groups as well as extreme militant groups. And that's why we've seen that they've gone towards attacking more of the opposition groups such as the Free Syrian Army rather than attacking ISIS. Experts, military analysts have been theorizing that the Russian government is trying to make the world choose between ISIS and the regime by knocking out the moderate opposition.
Okay, it's getting more complicated as you speak.
Exactly.
Now the U.S. has been there. My feeling about it is it's sort of a low-level presence. They've been doing bombing. Nobody on the ground, maybe some advisors. They had a plan to, train some of the Kurds, as I recall, and that failed miserably at $500 million failure. So what is the U.S. doing now? How does it play, in all of this activity?
In all of the activity within
Within Syria,
Turkey
yeah.
and within Syria. Yes, actually, you're absolutely right. The U.S. did just end its program of arming and supplying the Syrian opposition. Although there are reports that the U.S. government just airdropped over 50 tons of ammunition to Syrian opposition groups that are actually fighting against that are fighting anti-ISIS groups.
Okay, but they're not actively supporting the Kurds, though. They're supporting the Syrian groups. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. And so, and then this is getting more heated. It's hard to get a beat on it, but is it fair to say that there's a trend here, and the trend is toward greater violence, not less violence in Syria?
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's one of the a good strategy when you want to involve yourself in a conflict and stamp your feet or your presence in a country, and to have some say in the end resolution, is to create more conflict, because as long as the conflict is escalating, there is a need for you to be in there. And so Russia's involvement in this conflict could be an example of this strategy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, they're always trying to do the right thing, aren't they? Never mind. So now this is having an increased effect in Turkey. And just to go to Turkey for a minute, I remember we had, and I think I mentioned it to you last time we spoke, we had an Israeli strategist on the program a year ago who pointed out that Turkey was kind of like the capstone of the Middle East. It was relatively civilized, it was strong, it was almost like a European country, and it had a lot of influence in the Middle East. And so when Turkey is threatened, it has a sort of a secondary effect. And Turkey now is being threatened. I mean, these are destabilizing attacks. The attack over the weekend in Turkey was very well executed. It has the earmarks, doesn't it, of a real professional. These two bombs were set off within seconds of each other. And that's very professional terrorism, isn't it? I mean, people must recognize that as the signature of ISIS on a technical level, don't you think?
Yes, of course. And ISIS benefits from I guess, keeping the fire going in Turkey, continually unleashing this polarization within the country. Because with this attack now, even though it is ISIS that will have carried out the bombings, the Kurdish PKK will blame the Turkish government for allowing this to happen, for not providing the necessary security measures, which will then renew the conflict and escalate the conflict even more. And so ISIS benefits because both Kurds and Turks, which ISIS has declared as quote-unquote blatant apostates, will be fighting each other.
Yeah. Well, this is, I want to explore more with you, Russell, about how this is affecting Turkey and how this could be, a significant destabilizing effect on Turkey right now. I'd like to get to the background of how Turkey's been doing the last couple of years under Erdogan, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and then how what kind of catalytic effect these attacks are having on the sort of the state of stable or destabilization of Turkey already in process. But let's take a quick break and then come back with Russel Kekoa. Russel Kekoa Koehler, and we will talk some more about how this is affecting Turkey.
Hi, my name's Hillary Weinberg. I'm the host of The Whole Gamut on ThinkTech Hawaii. See us live every Tuesday at 1 p.m. or on our YouTube channel to hear us talk about world affairs from Hawaii and beyond. See you then.
Hi, I'm your host on ThinkTech Asia, Bill Sharp. I look forward to you joining us each Monday between 4 and 5 o'clock when we film right here in our studio in downtown Honolulu. The show, ThinkTech Asia, focuses on contemporary events in Asia. And by Asia, we mean anything from Hawaii, south to Australia and New Zealand, west to Pakistan, and as far north as the Russian Far East. Clearly, this is one of the most economically dynamic centers of the world, and we bring you up to date on what's going on in a whole host of countries in this very vital region. We look forward to seeing you. Aloha.
Okay, we're back. We're live with Russel Kekoa Koehler in Istanbul, and he's been covering the story in Turkey with us, for us, a couple of times now, and able to give us some insights into exactly what is happening, not only in Syria by report, but also in Turkey by firsthand. And it's a very interesting story. So a couple of years ago, you got to see some cracks in Turkey, and there were demonstrations in Taksim Square in Istanbul, and you got to realize that Turkey was not all as stable and solid as you thought, and that Erdogan was not popular at all. Recep Tayyip Erdogan is his name, and he's running the place, but apparently not well. And over the last 2 years, it seems like he's been losing ground, and part of the reason is, these attacks by ISIS. What do you think about that?
Well, in the last 2 years, we've really seen the kind of renewed sort of activism that we saw in 2013, and these attacks really are just going to further polarize the country and further bring it to the brink of complete political chaos. We have an election actually on November 1st, the Turkish general election, and you can imagine the political consequences that this is going to have for the ruling party, the AKP, which is President Erdogan's party. And according to many individuals on both the liberal side as well as the more left-wing side in the country, they very much blame the government for these attacks. I mean, there's been a lot of mistrust in the government.
Yeah, that's interesting. And there were a couple of articles in the New York Times this morning that you and I have discussed. And I wonder if you could summarize that, particularly the second one, which found that instead of having an effect of bringing people together, these attacks over the weekend have actually brought people into controversy. So Turkey is not at all together now. And that's a surprise, but I guess maybe not a big surprise.
Exactly. I mean, in this previous election, on June 7th, you actually had almost 40% of the country still support the AKP party. Now, even running up to these next elections, the opinion polls were actually to show a more status quo result, which would have been the same 40%. Now, what happens with these attacks is you have the conservative government on one side and these very liberal and pro-Kurdish supporting individuals and activists participating in this rally. When it's attacked, these people, they feel as though that it's not just the ISIS that is attacking their ideals, their principles. They feel that as though that the government itself is not providing them their natural right to life, and that it really depends on who you are and who you support that will keep you safe in the country. Because there have been many AKP rallies, which is, again, the President Erdogan's party, where security has been ramped up. There have been security checkpoints, there have been body searches, etc. I couldn't get within half a kilometer before being stopped by police or seeing some sort of police checkpoint. Yet in this specific attack, which was in this specific rally that was organized by left-wing labor organizations and the pro-Kurdish HDP party, which is the opposition party in Turkey, it said that there was only a handful of police officers, and there was only actually one checkpoint in one area of the city. And so really it was the negligence of the government that led to this unfortunate tragedy that ended up happening. And many people in Turkey are realizing that the government does not keep them safe. Actually, today, in many of the universities in Turkey, actually the one that I attended during my study abroad, students boycotted their classes to protest against the government, protest for exactly the message that these people who were unfortunately killed were voicing out, which was peace. And it only seems like it's going to get worse.
Yeah, and there are people out there that suspect that the government is somehow responsible, not only by negligence, but by affirmative action. Now, that may be carrying it a bit far, but you can see the tone of the country, according to these New York Times articles, is really against Erdogan, and he's going to have a hard time in the November 1st elections, only 2 weeks away. This will still be fresh on everybody's mind. And what's interesting, according to those articles, is that he has not made a speech, a public statement about what happened, which may be very bad politics in the circumstances. It almost is an accession that, maybe some of that criticism is right, and that he should be criticized for either negligence or worse. So, I mean, that's the point I wanted to cover with you last, Russell. It's this notion that it's going to get worse. And if I were ISIS, I would do more attacks. I would try to, turn the pot some more. I would try to get it even further destabilized. Take a perfectly Western country that until 2 years ago has been in pretty good shape as, a democracy. It's a democracy, right? And now all of a sudden we have the whole thing getting destabilized. How much of a threat is that, do you think?
I think it's likely that you'll see more political conflict, social conflict in this country. Your point to the fact that President Erdogan has not made a statement or a speech partially condemning or even really addressing the attacks is very evident of this, and it's quite sad because as president of Turkey, he's supposed to be above this political fighting, the political dirt and this swamp per se. He's supposed to be the symbol of Turkey, to bring Turks together, all Turks together. But it seems as though not only does he know, but opposition parties don't want to hear from him because they know of how divisive a figure that he's become.
Yeah. Well, we spoke before about all the parties and factions that are at war in Syria, and in fact, we have a tweet from Mark Ward. He says, "Wow, you need a flow chart to keep track of who is versus who is aligned with who is killing who." And I guess he's asking you to opine on the view of the average Turkish citizen. And I would add that it's not just all this confusion, maybe that's the wrong word, but all these people fighting it with each other in Syria, but now you have all the people fighting with each other and the government in Turkey itself. So what is the view of the average Turkish citizen, Russell?
Unfortunately, it really depends on your way of life, what you believe. If I have a Kurdish friend, but actually he's Turkish Kurdish, but he participated in some of the rallies in Istanbul that they were chanting "Murder Erdogan, murder AKP," and then you have more of this sort of liberal, middle of the line, which is still anti-government, that believes that there has to be some changes. There has to be changes in the government. That this negligence of the state institutions. But of course, you do have these conservative elements and the hardline supporters of the AKP party that they will believe really anything that the government here tells them, such as that they will believe that it was the PKK that conducted this attack, or you have nationalists here that are critical of the Turkish government as well, who blame Turkish foreign policy on allowing this to happen, and allowing the political and social chaos in this country. So it's, as you said, you do need a flow chart. You need a flow chart and a periodic table of elements and everything to see who is fighting who is against who. And it took me a year to actually understand just the political side of Turkish society. And that wasn't even diving into the social fabric and the cultural divisions really that you have here.
Yeah, well, Turkey is a country with a lot of different disparate elements, and it's wonderful that Turkey has come together and been a modern country since Ataturk in the 1920s. But a country that has disparate elements under the hood can always come apart too, and we can have those disparate elements working against each other just as quickly. And I guess it's of some concern that will happen. If I tell you that Erdogan will win in the elections on November 1st, I'm sure a lot of people will be unhappy with that, and they will go to the streets over it because they don't like him. And and there's justification for that. I recall, and we discussed this before, 2 years ago, he behaved badly over the Taksim Park incident. It's unnecessarily brutal with his own people. It's not a smart idea. And I think that's his baggage. He's had to suffer with that ever since, and he's not, among many quarters, he's not popular now because of it. So if he wins, there'll be people in the street. Not good. If he loses, that's the tougher question. Who would step in for him? Will it be somebody in his administration? Will it be somebody whose name we know? And what will happen? Will there be people in the streets on that?
Yeah, and that's actually a very depressing factor in the country right now, because Recep Tayyip Erdogan has the position of president. He's actually has a 5-year term as president, a solid 5-year term from 2013. So he's actually going to be still in office until 2018, where they'll have a popular election.
Oh, so it overlaps then.
Exactly.
This is for the government, the members of the parliament, whatever, coming up November 1st, but he overlapped. He's still in office.
Exactly, and that's part of the problem that we have. Most Turkish, the position of Turkish president that I stated previously was a symbolic role of bringing the country together amidst crises. But Erdogan has been such a divisive figure over the last 10 years that Turks, Americans, Brits, Europeans, they can't see him as that. They can't see him working with another party. If, let's say, the CHP party, the Social Democrat Party in Turkey, gets enough votes to become the majority party in Turkey. So it's really a country of or a status of the status quo right now.
Yeah. Oh, this is serious. And it's serious for the U.S. Finally, I wanted to ask you about that. The U.S. has semi-committed. You'd never say the U.S. is all in. If there are people who feel, and I have this conversation with people every day, who feel that if the U.S. Wants to do something, it has to decide to do it and be all in, follow it through. We haven't done that in the Middle East, and we are paying a big price for it. We're never all in. We're half in, or less. And so we don't put, boots on the ground, and sometimes we, develop policies that don't work because they're not really committed policies. So here we have the U.S. Now it's ostensibly bombing the forces that are the pro-Syrian forces. And it has some kind of agreement with Erdogan to build bases in Turkey. Where does the U.S. position play in all of this? It just sounds to me this is not what happened here over the weekend. Certainly is not what we want, but it will have another secondary effect on our engagement in the area, and it won't be a good one. Have you been thinking about that?
Of course, and Turkey being a NATO member, it's of extreme importance that the United States not only maintain its strong relationship with Turkey, but in this instance and in this current situation of the country, strengthen its relationship with Turkey. Now, for the Turkish people, unfortunately, that relationship might come into as an opposed interest to them, because we'd be supporting the current government. However, the United States needs to maintain a stable Turkey that is free of these security crises that involve ISIS and these radical jihadist groups.
Yeah. Well, if there is further attack on Turkey, and if Turkey gets into violence with any of the players that are playing out the violence in Syria, then the U.S. is there. The U.S. is there in Turkey, and presumably it can help Turkey. It's a difficult situation for the U.S. because exactly what does it help Turkey do? Turkey's policy is not clear. So you really wonder what the U.S. will do in any one of a number of differential steps taken by Turkey dealing with what is next door and what is inside the country. The U.S. has to be followed. If I were the State Department, I would be watching this every second of the day. Well, so what is the average person, going to Mark Ward's view of it, what is the average person on the street in Istanbul, or Ankara for that matter, what does the average person think about the U.S.? Is Turkey now a pro-U.S. country? Are people united in liking the U.S., or is there a difference of opinion on that one too?
Of course, there's a difference of opinion. Just in the last year or 2 years, there was an instance of U.S. Navymen actually docking off Istanbul, and they were attacked by nationalist members of the Turkish public, part of the MHP party. That's the very, very nationalist party in Turkey. And they're angry about the U.S. meddling in the Middle East. But on the whole, Turks in general are very favorable in view of the United States. You talk about interests in this region. While they may be critical of U.S. policies when it comes to Iraq in 2003 or our support of Israel, when it comes to the ordinary American, Turks are very, very, very pro-American in that regard.
Good. So do they have expectations, the Turks, the man on the street, do they have expectations that the U.S. will defend them in case of further attack? The U.S. will, step up its efforts to, maintain control in the area?
Unfortunately, because of all of these crises, you have the Kurdish conflict in the southeast, the refugee crisis in Turkey, as well as the Syrian war that's now, as we've seen, spilling over into Turkey. Regular Turks, they don't know what to think. They don't know whether or not the U.S. is going to fully support and defend the Turkish state, and they don't even know if the government itself, what their policy is on all of these issues themselves. It's just a very complex situation here, and most Turks, they're really shying away from not necessarily thinking about these situations, but they're trying to really go throughout their lives and just find the best way to live that they can.
Well, this is going to be hard for them, I think. You have Turkey Syria was a country with, its own sovereignty, with a relatively peaceful, if not certainly oppressive ruler, but it was an ordinary country until not too long ago. And I think in our times, you could take an ordinary country, a bigger country, a more democratic country, a stronger country like Turkey, and it could be undone in a similar fashion. Middle East is by no means a stable place, and people from the outside are always trying to come in and destabilize you. I mean, I'm sure that one of ISIS's purposes in all of these attacks is to try to destabilize and create commotion, in Turkey, make Turkey less, of a force that they have to deal with in Syria. So my final question to you, Russell, is what do you think is going to happen here? Let's take the hypothetical that there will be other attacks, and the attacks will be done by ISIS, and people in Turkey will be all confused and troubled, and they'll be looking for leadership. They won't find leadership. It'll be fragmented. What happens then to Turkey?
Well, if you have more attacks within Turkey, it's going to massively exacerbate the political and social conflict within this country. I would imagine that the Turkish government, even with this single attack, is going to compensate for the security failure that has happened in the capital. And so what we'll probably see in the next couple of weeks is a more active Turkey in terms of its military operations, in terms of its air bombing campaign. And if you have more of these attacks, you will see more opposition, more of the opposition parties be critical of the government and use it as a means of trying to foster this joint opposition against the current government in these next elections. If we do have a more status quo result of where it stays the same and we have an unstable government because they can't form a coalition, then we'll probably see the country digress into a more chaotic place when it comes to political and social discussion, when it comes to protesting, when it comes to the conflict with the Kurds in the east, because the Turkish government, their strategy is always, since the failure to form a coalition, has been this conservative nationalism. And these attacks fly in the face of that strength, of that stability that they've been campaigning for. And so what I see is a more active Turkey due to the fact that they need to convince the citizens that they're actually doing something. And if they don't, then really it's any guess to the level of political and social chaos that'll occur.
Yeah, and repression. And
Exactly.
Repression against activism often breeds more activism. So, the cycle goes. Well, I think it's serendipitous, but you're leaving Turkey in a few days. Maybe that's maybe that's a lucky thing for you, Russell.
My parents would say definitely it is a very good thing that I'm leaving the country during this time. But for me, how unfortunate these situations are, I'm fascinated by this place and by this subject, and I'll actually be very regretful that I won't be able to see what happens in the November elections in person, because I know that it's going to be a very chaotic time for this country.
Yeah. Russel Kekoa Koehler, a guy who doesn't mind being at the front line here, I think, at least politically. Thank you so much, Russell, for reporting to us, not on one occasion, but on two occasions. Wish you well in the next few days. Stay safe and have a good trip out. And, you can follow it at distance, and we will talk to you again about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Aloha.